I'm actually not sure if it's a good idea to give stage to a software engineer talking about some management topics. But yeah, here I am. And I actually like to give you some insights of a manager's day-to-day work managing a bunch of engineers. But instead, actually, to just talk about myself, the company I work for, and the people I work with, let me tell you a story about some planning issues and chaos management. Because that, in my opinion, might also be important if you maybe become a manager. And just as a little remark, the following story is really fictional, and all resemblances to people I work with on a daily basis are probably just a coincidence. So this is Bob, our main character of the story. And Bob already worked for several years as a senior software engineer, when back in around 2015, he got the opportunity to take the next step in his professional career, and he joined Blockster, a rather small company focusing on trying to sell all kinds of electronics. And in his new role as a software engineer, Bob was responsible for a team of 8 people. But actually already after the first week at work, Bob realized that work was quite chaotic. There was this big project going on to rewrite the entire website that most of the people from the engineering and product department were trying to focus on. But the engineers regularly got distracted by production issues or feature requests that were coming in sideways or support escalations. So Bob went to his supervisor, Carl Simmons, the CTO of Blockster, to have a discussion to find ways to get the amount of distractions under control. But his supervisor just clearly stated that he does not have any time to helping chaos, as Bob described it, under control. However, that was actually the reason why they hired him, Bob, the new software engineering manager. He should actually do whatever was necessary to reduce the amount of distractions so that people could fully focus on the new project. But whatever it will be that Bob was going to do, neither the old platform nor the project to actually rewrite the platform must be taken at risk. So no pressure. So rather disappointed from the outcome of that meeting, Bob went back to his desk and approached Sarah Bruckheimer, one of the project managers, to have a coffee and to talk about the upcoming planning. When Sarah showed him what they've planned for the next iteration, Bob couldn't actually grasp what he was looking at. Even though tickets were already dragged along for months, new tickets were just added on top. And instead of finding ways to successfully complete the sprint, it seemed like that every new one contained even more than the previous one. So when Bob actually asked Sarah what's the motivation to actually plan in such a useless way, Sarah simply replied that they have deadlines to fulfill, and that the tickets that they added were actually just to be aligned to the company's roadmap. So Sarah herself actually wasn't happy with the situation either, but that's how the company did it for years. So who was she to actually challenge this? And it seemed like people were so much occupied with their own work that no one actually looked at the things from a greater distance and realized that what they do is actually just not working out. Because the engineers were completely unhappy with the amount of tasks they've got assigned and with all the unplanned work they had to deal with on a daily basis. The product managers, on the other hand, were just writing down tickets the way the business wanted them to be, and were very unhappy with the project's velocity. So neither the engineers nor the product managers were actually empowered enough to take decisions by themselves to work something out that really works out best for them. And this clearly had a direct impact on people's motivation. And so to actually tackle this situation with all the ongoing unplanned work, Bob's first action was to get a feeling of the time that it spent on such reactive work. So what he did is he took the average of these numbers from the past 6 months to get actually a clear picture of how much time was spent on unplanned work. And just give me a little remark on that. Usually when you do some planning, you should consider that the sprint consists actually of 3 things. So one is corporate overhead, then you have the plannable time, and you have unplanned time. And the corporate overhead is actually the time that goes towards all the things like all hands meetings or plannings or retrospectives, dailies, and so on. And some of these activities may be really necessary, but in many organizations, they really consume a lot of time. Then the plannable time is the one thing that goes in second into a sprint. This is actually that time that belongs collectively to the team. And the last but not least one is unplanned time. And unplanned time goes toward 3 things again. That's one is emergencies, like the engineers, what we really love is like all these outages that's happening all the time. Tasks that during planning we didn't thought of that they're getting so big. And the last one is all these tasks that none of us thought of during the planning. Let's get back to the story. So now that Bob actually had a better understanding about the time that was wasted towards all this kind of reactive work, Bob proposed to not only take plannable time into account, but also any kind of corporate overhead or everything that goes towards unplanned work. And to get a better sprint success rate, Bob's strategy was actually to add a moderate margin safety. And this is also known as a buffer. But of course, by reducing the amount of planned work, the actual day-to-day work didn't really change. Because of course, there were still outages, there were still engineers that got distracted by whatever support escalations. And of course, there were still all these tasks that were planned during the sprint that needs to be completed. But the team, and I think that's really the most important part, started to build the awareness that things on a daily basis were not okay. So now the engineers, as well as the product managers, started to actually address what was wrong. And the engineers created tickets or technical tickets and planned them so that after every sprint, the live platform as well as the infrastructure became a bit more stable. The product managers on their side started to create channels in their collaboration tool so that all the requests that were coming in from the business and the sales force could be addressed without them going directly to the engineers. So by creating such technical tickets, as well as channeling all the feature requests and bug reports, the buffer for reactive work could actually be slowly reduced again. So in the first 3 months at Blockster, Bob mainly was just like firefighting. He was participating in meetings and talking to people all over the place just to get a better understanding on the company goals and business issues and whatever daily problems Blockster was actually facing. And it seemed like everyone really was just drowning in work. There was just no time for any kind of interpersonal exchange. And from Bob's perspective, one of the key takeaways from his previous company was the importance to have a dedicated space on the calendar for any anticipated conversation between a manager and his team member. And Bob actually always understood a one-on-one as a place for coaching, for mentorship, giving context, and even some venting. And he always was glad to have someone he could actually talk to, especially to connect on pressing issues, or to get the feeling that he was working towards the right goals, be it at work or otherwise. And now that at least some of the planning issues seemed to be on the right track, organizing one-on-ones with the people appeared really just to be the perfect moment. But after the first couple of one-on-ones, Bob sincerely was concerned of the habit of people for unsustainable work practices and a likely, let's call it, poisoned work environment. And even though the situation in the company started to improve, the people were complaining about some of the restrictions they had to adhere, and that none of them actually were in a position where they could unleash their true expertise. And when Bob was having the one-on-one with Colin Foreman, that was a senior backend engineer of his team, Colin actually mentioned that there are tons of tickets in the backlog lying around for a month that, if completed, would resolve many problems the engineering were facing on a daily basis. The problem just was that all of these tickets, or most of these tickets, were affecting the old platform. And besides that, there was only like Carl Cement really taken care of. I think that's similar to Ricardo part. But during the one-on-one with Colin, Bob started to further identify that his supervisor, Carl Cement, was not only participating in most of the meetings happening, but also accepted feature requests without having them planned. So, in Bob's opinion, it was kind of just impossible that Bob's CTO could execute all these actions assigned. And according to the theory of constraints, organizations are prevented from achieving their goals because of one or more of the constraints. And the constraint can be a team, it can be an individual, it can also be like poor product quality. Having one or more constraints in your organization usually leads to some lost business opportunities or replanning business projects. And for Bob, it actually was evident that Carl Cement was a constraint and thus was really a business risk. So not only was the business waiting for features or bug fixes to be completed, also the engineers were clearly affected by that. By not fixing some of the issues, the engineers regularly got distracted by unplanned work and thus hindering them to focus on what was actually relevant for the business. I think being part of the executive board and getting asked a series of unpleasant questions from one of your direct reports might really put both of the parties into a kind of rather uncomfortable situation. But to actually make an impact on the situation, it was crucial for Bob to leave his comfort zone. And Bob remembered his former mentor who once told him that being a manager does not only mean to manage the people you're responsible for, but to also manage the people you're reporting to. So it was up to Bob to help his boss understand how he can help the engineering and product department to do their best work possible. And when Bob was sitting together with his manager, Carl Cement, in a meeting, Bob didn't really tell what he thinks his boss needs to do. He did neither propose concrete solutions nor challenge the way Carl Cement was doing his work. What Bob did was to explain the situation in a form that his boss himself came to the conclusion that it might make more sense to really back off from all the technical tasks and technical decisions. And finally, things started to get going, and in order to define who's gonna take over which ticket from Carl Cement and actually how to tackle it, it was necessary that everyone from the team was participating in a backlog refinement process. And before the next sprint planning, Bob made a call for the meeting and invited all the engineers and product managers and even his boss, Carl Cement. And it was clear from the beginning on that the meeting won't actually be just a walk in the park. So some of the people were really afraid that with all the extra work, they now have to spend even less time on what they actually are supposed to work on. Some others complained that they now have to work with things for what they actually never signed up when joining the company. And in the end, it was Sarah, the project manager, that proposed to actually rewrite the tickets first, so that everyone in the team really started to get an understanding of what the tickets were about. And all the impediments had to be resolved, and all the dependencies, if any, needed to be included. And after hours of work, things finally started to be transparent enough so that the people felt more comfortable and more motivated to take over. And for the next month, the team regularly held meetings like to plan, to coordinate, to identify bottlenecks, for what they also took immediate steps to resolve them. And besides the talks of what went good and bad in the last iteration, retrospectives really helped them to track process changes and slightly do some adjustments if necessary. And of course, not everything went as smoothly all the time. Sometimes the buffer for all the unplanned work was just defined completely wrong. Other times, the engineers were really losing focus on what was relevant for the business, and instead were just like hacking around to get removing some technical debts. But it was like for the first time since years when people in the team really worked closely together and were trying to optimize their output. So I think one of the key points in the story is that a manager actually needs really to be able to build strong and trusted relationships with the people in his team, and to empower the people so that they can do whatever works best for them and to get really the best results. And as a manager, you need to be able to challenge them, to push them to do better, and for their own success, and not for the business. So let me elaborate this a bit further. Helping people to reach their goals, to be happy, and help them find doing what they really enjoy doing the most will ultimately yield better value from the work they do. And as a side effect, the business will benefit more greatly than if you push someone just down the road that was built with the business in mind. So I think our typical picture of delivering value is completing projects. It's shipping features. It's fixing bugs, and so on. And if you manage to actually escape to not falling back in being just lead engineer and coding all day, then you're still probably trying to satisfy your need to complete tasks each day, to get at least like the feeling that at the end of the day you did something. And this often leads to one acting as a project manager, like focusing on signing tickets, tracking metrics, asking for status updates, and so on. So in short, what you're doing actually is you're focused on the work of the team, and you can check things off of your list each day, and you actually get the feeling that you did something. And yay, you are. But that's actually just half of your job, the easiest half. But because the other half is really hard, the most unlike what you've been doing your whole career and probably where you lack the most skill, that other half is growing your team. It's helping individuals in their career, not technically, but actually to become productive people, finding ways to make your team work better together, having one-on-ones, coaching, listening, mentoring, and so on. It turns out that the soft stuff is actually the hard stuff. And if you ignore this part of your job, you're going to leave a lot of value behind you. And yes, you may still deliver results, but they will be far short of your team's potential. And yes, you may optimize some efficiency, but you always lack true progress in effectiveness of your team. And you won't ever meaningfully raise the bar, and you won't know why. I think mastering soft skills means caring personally about the people you're working with and doing what you can to bring out their best. But it also means recognizing when someone's actually not really a good fit for your team. And in extreme cases, letting them go can actually work out better for everyone involved. Is it them, the team, or finally the business? If you take the example of Bob, one of his key concerns was that the poisoned or likely poisoned work environment and the people that were just overwhelmed by work. And no one really had actually a picture of where the train was heading to. I think doing one-on-ones regularly, and in my opinion, really do it once a week, you're not only getting a feeling of the mood of the people in your team, but you actually also have the possibility to directly shed some light on things that people might not yet see or understand. Having an open communication is a key part in managing people. And when you do one-on-ones, tell the others about yourself and what makes you tick. Let your team members know about all your weaknesses, your issues, and also your strengths. Your goal actually is to earn their trust so that they come to you whenever they have issues that needs to be solved. And if you allow them to speak openly, they're going to tell you exactly what they need. And in return, they help you to become a better manager. I think your role as a manager is also to protect the team from things like impossible deadlines or from commitments your team actually was never involved. And don't immediately answer yes to every request that is coming from your boss. Buy a bit of time and get to your team and get the involvement in making together the commitment. Explain your team actually why this high priority request is so important to the company. Explain how or in what way your customers are affected. Explain what exactly needs to be solved. But most importantly, involve your team to work out the solution. I think there are going to be times when you have no choice but receiving and delivering marching orders. But when the team is involved in the commitment, everything is going to be a bit better. Too much direction is also often like a symptom of what we like to call micromanagement. And that leads to teams who are unable to work autonomously because all the decisions that need to be taken are going through you. And you will end up in being the bottleneck for your team. And yeah, you remember Carl Simmons, who was the only one taking care of the old platform? So identify bottlenecks or constraint, what we used to call it in our story. Exploit the constraint and make sure that the constraint is not allowed to waste any time ever. Mastering the theory of constraints is part of your job as a manager, as well as all the other things that we learned up until now. In truth, your work is reflected in the work by the team. Having them accomplish their goals is actually your goal. Your value is ultimately measured by their success. So whatever there is that is interrupting your team in their effectiveness is probably your aim to tackle. And in case shit rolls downhill, it's your task, not just forward the blame. Analyze the situation first if you can. Like, did your team actually do all they could to avoid or remedy the situation? Did they truly do their best? Did everyone in the team take full responsibility for what they did? And if you believe that your team was justified in what they did or that they made an honest mistake, you're probably going to decide to fully support them. Yeah, remember those years when you were learning and you spent a lot of time in latest technologies and frameworks and libraries, languages, and so on to actually become a better engineer? And yes, as a manager, this does not change. Management, I think, is a skill, it's an art, it's a practice. It is actually an ability you acquire over time, and it requires the same amount of dedication to learning all these new things than what you devoted to when you did all the engineering stuff. I think leadership really inspires. It doesn't dictate. I think a leader paints the picture of the destination. Good leadership actually provides enough context about the mission, the strategy, and the objectives to enable the people to be involved to make the good decisions. And leadership really has nothing to do with the seniority or the position within the organization. Often people I talk to really refer many times to companies' leadership that have the most senior executives. But they're actually really just that. They're just like senior executives. I think leadership is a mindset in action. So really don't wait for a title. Leadership isn't something that anyone can give you. You have to earn it, and you have to claim it for yourself. Thanks.